rocket begins by going up, and then shortly after it's going up, you start to see it curve over. You start to see it turn sideways. That's right. The rockets don't just go up, 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 and up until they go to space. No, they go up and then they turn sideways. And do you know what happens after the rockets turn sideways? If you guessed that they start going downward back towards the ground, you are correct. In this case, they start going downward towards the water. And I believe once these rocket ships leave the view of the public's eye, they splash down in the ocean, or perhaps these rockets can be designed to self-destruct in the air and burn up in the air so that they don't have to go retrieve the remains of the rocket out of the ocean.
Rockets turn sideways because they're trying to go around Earth, Jake, not straight up. Going straight up would mean fall straight back down. Going sideways fast enough is how you get into orbit. And yes, rockets do start falling back towards Earth, but they're moving so far sideways that they keep missing the ground. That is literally what an orbit is. It's funny because he's accidentally describing an orbit and he thinks it's failure.
So you don't...
So I've been seeing, since the Artemis mission has launched and now landed, how many debunkers of flat Earth are having to go through the brand new batch of flat-tard content. I will be very clear. The Earth is round. So the reason I played that clip is not that I'm here to personally debunk or whatever, but what I see going on is that there are two things at play. One is a type of brainwashing mind control, basically. And I don't have 100% of the facts on it, so pardon me for speculating here. But what I see happening is things like flat Earth and the Mandela effect are situations where your subjective awareness is being used as an objective, definitive reality. And so what they're doing is they're taking people who are prone to certain narcissistic traits, that there are certain types that really like to have that inside information, that want to have that secret knowledge. They want to be the one that, well, look, I'll tell you what's really going on. Listen up. And they literally will do that expression. They will do that tone of, oh no, man, there's something else. There's a thing. I've experienced it. I've been there. Not in the flat Earth sense, but in other things. And so what they do is they trick people into believing that they have this secret inside information. And what's actually happening is the full demoralization of these individuals is happening right under their nose, to the point that you can prove them wrong. They're not going to believe you. This is a foundational part of demoralization propaganda, is that the victims of this manipulation, once affected, cannot be fixed. That's the whole problem with Marxist useful idiots. That's the whole problem with most of the movements that are going these days, is that type of narc baiting, emotional manipulation, locking people into it. It's like dropping a logic bomb on a computer. You got them running in circles in their head, unable to be aware of the fact that they're running circles because of the nature of the circle they're running. So that's the one thing that I see going on, is that you've got some kind of demoralization going on, to where these people are not able to tell truth from falsehood. They're not able to tell objective from subjective, and they supersede all objective reality that other people can see and interact with. They completely substitute that with what their personal POV suggests. Now, I am familiar with this because of my personal quest for understanding and experiencing higher power spiritual stuff, with the context that I am on the autism spectrum. And I, as far as I can tell, am in a position that used to be referred to as logic boy, which means my brain only thinks with logic and in terms of logic. And if I'm to deal with something that is outside of those bounds, the only way to do so, I've found, rather than have a meltdown, freak out, not leave the house, whatever a lot of other people do, the weak ones, that's what they do, okay? What I do is I find the rational causes behind irrational behaviors or irrational seeming events. There is, in fact, a consistent cause and effect pattern behind it. It just may not be obvious. Likewise, these people who are having an issue with being manipulated into just disregarding any empirical observations, any objective facts or truths in favor of their own subjectivity, because they've been tricked into having this insider information or this knowledge. And then when you hear the things like what I showed at the clip at the beginning here that I had playing, you can hear the rationalization, the attempt to take an objective fact. The rocket is going straight up, but because of the rotation of the Earth, the trajectory of the rocket appears to go like this. It's still going basically straight up, and then they start to orient like this, and that's it. If you disregard parallax, if you disregard perspective and distance completely, and just say, well, obviously the shape of the cloud is an arc, therefore it's going back down. This is an optical illusion, and you are attempting to enforce the illusion as reality when they do that. That's what that is. I will show you, secondly, what seems to be going on here with that. A couple of examples. Pardon me for not being better prepared. Here's one illusion. Which line is longer? Now, objectively, factually, logically, you can measure both lines. And what you'll find is, and this is a hand-drawn sketch, mind you, but the way it's properly done is they are equal lengths. They are the same length, no difference. The illusion comes from the little arrows. Now, imagine a person convincing themselves that this one is longer, obviously, because it looks longer. Just look at it. Just look at it. Well, you go to measure it, and they say, oh, we don't need to do that. You can look at it. You can see. And they'll come up with all the rationalizations in the world to explain why this is actually longer until you measure it. And you say, no, they're both exactly the same length, and that's an illusion, and you've been tricked. Well, it's easier to trick a person by far than to convince someone that they've been tricked. You have people who are convincing themselves that this is longer. Doesn't matter what the measurements say. Doesn't mean you're lying. It's a conspiracy. The fact is, if you look at it, this one's obviously longer. Or a field of alternating black and white lines, and there's a shape cut out with inverted blacks and whites. And the whole thing looks like it's moving, but it's not moving. It's a still image. You could paint this onto something and it would still appear to move. The people with the flat tire problem would convince themselves, therefore, if they were to actually be logically consistent with their own beliefs, would then insist that this still painting or the still image is in fact moving, and it's a conspiracy and there's trickery and falsification going on, even if it's not. To the point that you have these absurd ideas about how they think the world is actually shaped and all the concoctions they must come up with to rationalize why this impossible and irrational situation of sun here and moon here and they're moving around in the flat plate and all that, this comes down to Occam's razor. It's not that the simplest explanation is correct. It's that the explanation that from an empirical standpoint makes the least number of assumptions. An assumption is making a guess without any data. Empirical means having data. So you make more assumptions on flat Earth than you do on globe Earth. Because globe Earth, there are measurements. There are actual empirical measurements. There are video and photo and telemetry and either millions of people are in on the farce, and there's some secret bunker underneath of the flat surface of the firmament that is where the astronauts hide while they pretend to be on missions or whatever, the amount of lengths that it would have to go to for that, this is not the same as saying, well, back in the day, you would talk about the elites being all kinds of degenerate monsters and hurting kids and all this other stuff, and people would say, oh, that's some conspiracy, that it would take too much. Well, the thing is, there's not nearly as many people involved in that conspiracy, which we now have empirical evidence of, than there are in the number of people that work in the space industry and aerospace and NASA and the military. And to convince all of those people to lie about it is completely like orders of magnitude more money, orders of magnitude more effort than what it took for a handful of people to traffic as many underage persons as possible to a slightly larger couple of hands full of very rich people that do that for sport. The difference between, just because it is, both of them are at a distance abstractly from you, right? So what this comes to is that you have people who are tricked into being unable to think in terms of the abstract. If it's not in front of them, if it's not something they can touch and see, it's not real. The problem is, this device is connected to the internet, even though there's no wires. Can you see the connection to the internet? No. But from empirical research that is how that works. And this is not a naturally occurring phenomenon that we're measuring. This is a thing that we built. But you can't see it. What about that? You tell me this is a real thing that exists, an object which can be produced? I mean, look at it. You can see it right there with your own eyes. It's obviously something that can be built. Until you were to try and do it and realize that you can't. Because these 3 cylinders become impossible. But that should not, if they are being consistent within their own reasoning, that should not be possible for a flat earther to deny. They should be able to believe that such things exist and should probably actually claim that they used to have one when they were a kid. So this is what is actually going on with it. It's not a matter of logical refutation. You cannot use logic to refute brainwashing with someone who has already fallen victim to it. The whole point of the brainwashing is to lock them off from their critical thinking faculties so that they are unable to use logic. Therefore, with virtual thought constantly in a circle assuring them that they're already right and whatever they're experiencing is the truth. So, I mean, this falls into the type of object permanence questions that we have about kids, where it's like, why is it that when kids, you cover their eyes and they can't, it's like, thinking that if I close my eyes, you can't see me, right? Because when I close my eyes, there's nothing visible. Therefore, I am invisible. This is literally the same kind of reasoning that Flat Earth uses. The problem is, I can tell a reasonable group of people watching my videos that that's what it is. And they can be like, oh yeah, no, those people are pretty well tricked into permanently being broken on account of thinking they want to have the inside information. And what it really comes to is just taking people that might otherwise have been quite intelligent and rational and able to help other people think past the problems that they're facing. Instead, those people are trapped, mired in this bullshit hell of imaginary, illogical nonsense that they are convinced is real. You can tell rational people all about it all day long. They'll be like, oh, no, all you're doing is preaching to the choir. That's all I'm doing here. But if you try and talk to somebody, now, apparently some of these dudes that went to Antarctica might have been convinced after the fact, or maybe they're at least a little bit, dubious of what they've been promoting. But there are so many people that won't and can't be bothered to go find out. It's not possible. It's not feasible. It's not within, their means. But there are other things they can do to try and test it, and instead take the results and bend them into what they already wanted to believe. And so those are the ones that you can try and explain this stuff logically. You can say, bro, this is literally what you're doing, is claiming that this is actually longer because your eyes tell you it's longer. That was my thing, was knowing that there was a higher power in the world. I could see it in action, but I could not feel it. It could not seem to see me, and I wanted to break through. And what that required for me was to use some psychedelics and meditation and surreal experiences to try and break what my mind was insisting was the only reality. My logic boy autism spectrum point of view subjective perception is all I can experience. It's all I can know. And yet I know that there is more beyond it. And so for me personally, in that type of neurodivergence, to be able to transcend that required me to shatter my reality. And that's what it's going to take for people who think that this one is still longer, or who think that this is a real object which can be manufactured, because your eyes show you it's a thing. But you can't argue that with them. If you can shatter their reality, really, I think what has to happen is they have to choose to shatter their reality. You can't have it forced on you. You can't be told what the matrix is, right? You got to step through the door. And I'm not even sure if tricking people into stepping through the door will work. I'm really not sure. But one way or another, you have to get someone to be able to acknowledge that because you can measure these two lines and find out the two lines are the same. This extrapolates and equivalates outward to things like orbital mechanics and spaceflight, globe Earth, and the the reasoning of believing that such a complicated setup as a flat disk with a dome and all of these lights moving around on some kind of mechanism, that while also somehow existing in a universe is a more realistic proposition. The only circumstance in which that is the more realistic proposition is an absolute simulacrum of reality, as it otherwise would be, which we are trapped in and could never prove that we are in, which means to prove that the Earth is flat when it seems to be round would be like proving the simulation from within the simulation. So don't be too upset with the people that can't help it. They've been tricked, they've been fooled, possibly they've been broken permanently. But it really does come down to, and maybe if it's just make fun of them for it, show them an optical illusion and tell them that what they're telling you about why they think the Earth is flat and all the reasoning and excuses and mental gymnastics that they use to try and convince other people to spread that mind virus around. You need to show them that this is literally all they're doing. You're using optical illusions, tricking yourself, and then convincing yourself that what you've been tricked to believe is true is the objective reality and that everyone else is wrong. If you look up that kind of behavior, talk to a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist of any type about it, what they will tell you is that is things like delusion, that is psychosis, a complete psychotic break from reality. That is what is going on in these people's heads. And it all comes down to forcing people, tricking people into believing that optical illusions are real. That is what it comes down to.